Okay, let me see if I can fix my camera here.
Stacy's coming along in a minute too.
I see that. So do you celebrate Easter in any way, Barry?
Yeah, I'm invited to Easter dinner with some Christian friends of mine this evening.
But you don't go to early services, in other words.
Well, first of all, I was raised Jewish, so
Right.
if I were going to go to celebrations, it would be Passover. But I really don't have any Jewish friends who still do Passover Seders in my demographic here. The retired moved
Really?
away or whatever. So
Interesting.
yeah.
It seemed like there should be a community there.
Well, there is, except that they've either aged out or moved out of town, and so the younger community would be, but I'm not in that circle of younger Jewish observers of Passover, at least in my neck of the
Morning,
woods.
Stacy.
Oh, we're not hearing you. Unmute, Stacy.
I was just typing you to let us in.
So this is an opportunity, I thought, to do a retrospective on how unblocking did or didn't work, or how barn raising does or doesn't work, and possibly use those ideas to fold into this new thing that I'm considering launching, or anybody else could launch.
Yeah.
Or you just hang out and make it social, but it's kind of up to what you guys want to do.
Well, I guess it depends on who else shows up besides the three of us predictable regulars.
Yeah, but I do think that, you know, if we actually try and have a little bit of focus, the conversation will go very differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And having a topic that's people have thought about in advance and agreed on that's the topic or agenda, at least for the first hour, I think would help to maintain focus. When you start with sort of what's happening now in your life, you get this sort of hodgepodge of randomly contributed potential topics and kind of like end up picking one at random. The others may not have thought much about.
Barry, can you tie in the post that you just made that we were just talking about with Sam's ask?
Yeah, sure. It's very short. I'll just go ahead and read it. And in fact, as you know, I tagged Sam on it. Let me just bring it up real quick.
Oh,
You know how I do word of the day, Sam. So this is very short. I just posted it. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you're reading it. Okay, go ahead.
Maybe you should read it out loud so it's on the recording.
Barry, would you like to do that?
Oh, sure. So today's word of the day is upset. The foundations of mathematics emerge from set theory. But what about upset theory? What, pray tell, is that the foundation of? There really ought to be some useful and insightful literature under the rubric of upset theory to explain and reveal how and why someone becomes upset when upsetting things happen and how they handle it. I reckon there's a laundry list of dysfunctional and maladaptive responses to becoming upset, but where is the guidance on ethical best practices when upsetting things happen?
Stacy, you had thoughts?
Well, I just bring that up because both Barry and I were talking about how, at least, you know, like this is what's really most important for me. I would like to see these, you know, best practices set up. So I figured with your ask and unblocking, if we could tie it all together, then we might all get something from this call.
Yeah,
I
Stacey
could
and I
shoot off
both.
the hip.
What?
I could shoot from the hip.
Stacey and I both admit that this is a key frontier of our lifelong learning journey. And I reckon it probably is for a lot of people. You know, we use the word trigger here a lot, and I think trigger is just a synonym for becoming upset at some level of upsetness.
Yep.
So it does.
So let me try something then.
Okay.
I mean, clearly one of the things that we had wanted to do in a different forum was to come prepared. But since this is brand new, I'm going to excuse myself for not being prepared. Is that okay? Otherwise, I'll shut up.
Yes, no. I just want to say something because that might be your goal to become prepared. But I think that the way we need to live life is to be prepared for whatever comes at us. So part of this idea of, like, I don't look at it always as shooting from the hip.
Okay, it's shooting from a very old hip. How's that? A hip with lots of experience,
Right.
with some experience. Let's say some experience.
In fact, I'll make a disclosure. This is actually on a blog that I posted in 2013. So what we're talking about 9 years ago.
Yep.
And it was on the occasion of the emergence of the 5th edition of DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And in that discussion, I was referring back to some turbulent passages in my life when I was dealing with a lot of complex and disturbing issues. And I wrote, during those turbulent times, I went to talk to a first-rate psychologist about navigating my way through a variety of real-world problems for which my STEM education, PhD in system science from Stanford University, left me ill-prepared. After a few months, I received a DSM-3 diagnosis of 309.28, quote, adjustment reaction with mixed emotional features, unquote. I asked the shrink what that meant in plain English. He said, it means you get upset when upsetting things happen. Well, yeah.
So that presumes that there's some people who do not get upset when upsetting things happen, right?
There's stoicism, if you want to say, or denialism. I guess denialism and stoicism maybe are two varieties of not reacting. Does that make sense?
It does, but those are not the only other options.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't have a laundry list of how to not react in any visible way. Although it doesn't mean that your brain isn't turbulent. You know.
So what about a calm Zen-like confidence, which I think is where Stacy's going?
Yeah, I guess I can. So like meditation, just sit quietly and meditate and let it just. No, that's not what you're talking about.
No, I mean, not that, but that meditation has prepared you for handling something calmly, without getting upset, without getting anxious, without getting fearful, without getting into chaos, without getting into trigger, without getting into high emotion.
Yeah.
Just basically say, okay, this is new. Let me look at it. What do I want? What's possible? How do I choose? All that kind of calm thinking, as opposed to, oh man, I haven't seen this before. What do I do? Do I call somebody? Where's 911? I don't have my underwear on. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. At a minimum, you can say, well, that's upsetting, and let it go at that. Just
Or usually people say F-bomb rather than I'm upset.
yeah, well, that's upsetting.
Let me just quote a scene from A Fish Called Wanda. Many of you have heard me say this line before. Kevin's character, what's his last name? He's expecting to find whatever they stole in this safe, right? So he hides the safe in this warehouse. He goes to the warehouse. He's finally going to go get this thing after this big job has been done. He opens up the safe. It's empty, and he says, I am disappointed.
Lawyers say that when they lose a case. This was a very disappointing judgment, right? Decision, right?
But do you remember that line? Did you see the movie?
I've seen the movie, but it's like 20 years ago. So I don't actually remember the line.
I think that's a great line.
But he said it with
Self-aware,
great emotion. Yeah.
able
like,
to
oh.
express it. It's easy.
Yeah.
So to get back to the word trigger and trying to be more technical about it, would like the word signal or switch be a better term to use?
If you ask me, I would say no. I think the term trigger actually has a lot of additional implications that signal and switch don't have.
But that's my point.
Yeah.
To get rid of the implications.
Yeah. I mean, that's the word that I've hardly ever heard used except in these GCC sessions. And I don't know if it's Doug or just the other people, but that word is used so often here. And I basically don't use that word. I mean, it has a connotation of reacting maladaptively or dysfunctionally. It suggests that you're not processing it in an intelligent, wise, what's the word I'm looking for? Civil,
Balanced.
Yeah,
Rational.
effective, peaceable, etc. way. And I will admit that there are things that upset me that just, send me off flying off the handle. And nothing that I try, everything makes it worse. Doesn't make it better, or maybe even makes it worse. And so the level of disappointment or upsetness sort of is rising over time instead of resolving.
And we've also heard like somebody like Heiner using it to mean motivated towards action. So
right.
I'm specifically looking for a word that takes away all biases.
Yeah. Having it in an optimally professional, functional, effective way. And I consider that a weakness in my education training, practices. It's clearly a weakness in my practices.
That's common. That's a very common weakness.
You want to itemize gaps in education? We could go on for quite a long time.
Well, I didn't study psychology or, the humanities. It was all STEM stuff. Well, not all, but predominantly STEM stuff.
So I do think it's useful to find a word that does take away all biases, but I do think the word trigger still is useful when you can see the other implications that trigger the word brings, and you actually see that in effect. So I actually think that there's appropriate uses of the word trigger as well.
Yeah, I've seen words like I'm concerned, I'm disturbed. So upset, disturbed, and concerned are sort of milder, but don't completely hide the emotional state. I think maybe concerned is the most gentle of those three terms that I know of.
I mean, the issue I have is that the word trigger can actually trigger people because they hear that word and that puts them in a defensive mode.
Right. The reaction of being triggered causes a ping pong of trigger and counter trigger.
And the other person as well. Man, I use the phrase "I am triggered" a lot, and I know that then people's ears perk up.
Yeah.
That's because we've normalized it. Like we're kind of desensitized to that word at this point. I think in our circle.
I don't think we are. I think that's
when you say I'm triggered, I don't get all tense. If somebody else said it, I might.
By the way, Jennifer Marshall and Jeffrey Mercer have both already posted brief comments, one or two paragraph comments on that thread today, if you want to look at them. And I'm pretty sure you know who Jeffrey Mercer is. I don't know if you both know who Jennifer is.
I don't. Jennifer, I know. I don't know.
Well, Jeffrey is a correspondent on Facebook who I think is a practicing psychologist, and he often posts on sort of kind of generic psychological topics without ever mentioning any clients or individual cases.
I'm not getting.
So anyway, my response to you, Barry, was trying to go in a certain direction.
Hey, okay, go ahead.
Which is
lay it out.
People generally get upset, or at least one big category of upset is one feels like they do not know how to handle a situation.
Yeah,
they find themselves in a situation that they do not know how to handle. They don't either have a confidence in themselves that they can meet the situation and figure it out, or it doesn't trigger a recipe that's from the past that's been imprinted on them that tells them exactly how to handle a situation. Right?
Yes, I'll buy that. Absolutely.
And I think the recipe situation potentially makes you unconscious, right? Because then you say, oh, well, I recognize it, therefore I'm going to apply this pattern, perhaps without understanding the nuances of that situation and possibly misapplying the recipe.
Yep. Yep.
The downside of the confidence is maybe you don't have the knowledge that comes from, well, the obvious thing to try doesn't work because all this research says that's not the right thing to do in this situation, even though intuition says I ought to try this right now.
Yep. You
And
try
I'm
things
very
and they
confident.
don't, yeah, you try things and they don't work or they backfire. And pretty soon you realize that almost everything that anybody's ever suggested either doesn't work at all or backfires.
But some things do, right? So we have to pick out that small percentage of things that do work, learn those, and then have the, what's the right word for making distinctions?
Discernment.
Resolving.
Yeah, discernment, right, good, thanks. To understand when to apply a pattern and when to actually see the specifics of a situation that might take you away from optimal use of that old pattern.
Yeah.
And I think nothing gets away from making sure that you're aware in the moment and yet still considering, okay, so what's my tool set that I could bring to bear on this?
Yeah. But my default practice, if I can't think of anything to solve it, is simply to tell the story as succinctly as I can, which usually isn't very succinct at the beginning. It's all kind of rambling at the beginning. And then eventually I will refine the story down to where it's moderately entertaining to read and basically reveals the insoluble problem that simply remains afloat.
Do you always do that alone or do you do that in company?
Usually the first draft will appear on a social network like Facebook, but it'll be kind of lengthy, rambling, and incomplete. And then eventually it will boil down to either an allegory version or an essay version or some kind of version that basically tells the story as succinctly and as well as I can, and then I post it. And then sometimes it'll turn around and I'll write a song parody or some other, therapy around it, make it into an allegory. But that's my weak side. I'm not a storyteller. I'm a story maker. I'm never trained in how to tell a good story. I'm not a bard. First of all, even if I made a song, I couldn't sing it because I can't carry a tune.
The reason I asked that question is not about you personally, but in general, I think we need to recognize that what some people do to work out their own internal processes impacts other people. So that's why I asked you if we do that alone.
Oh yeah. Usually the first telling will be something like a post on a social network. First of all, I don't have that many people that I can sit down with face to face over coffee and just, spill my guts. There's almost no occasion where I do that other than something like here on a Zoom session or post it on a social network. So
Can I riff on Stacy's last comment, which is kind of where I was leaning on my second point in response to your question, which is, and whose responsibility is it? So in other words, if I am quote unquote upset or triggered, okay, is it my responsibility to calm myself down, to self-soothe? Or is it the group's responsibility to soothe me? Or is there some other scenario? Because I know this has been a point of discussion and possible disagreement between Doug and me on many occasions.
that's interesting. Yeah, I don't really have a good answer. It's probably the answer is it depends. Depends on the person, on their level of maturity, their age, who their correspondents or consultants or confidants are. Probably depends on a lot of factors.
So I actually have been pretty clear on my position on this, okay? And there's 2 points I'd like to make on this. One is, if I am triggered, then it's my responsibility to get myself out of that and to get myself back to a functioning state of being, okay? That's my first response. Let me let somebody in here.
It's Carl.
Carl.
It's Carl, okay. So that's my first response, is that I am responsible when I'm triggered. However, okay, if I have friends who care about me, okay, and they're in this meeting, And they also see the value of the group investment in time and attention, okay? And they know that that group investment and that intent would be sidetracked if all basically turned their attention now to me and my triggers, okay? Hey, Carl. So I would say one or two of those friends on their own volition, okay, without responsibility, without commitment, could say, oh, I noticed that Sam is triggered. Let me try and get offline back channel with him and let's make sure that Sam's okay. And if they say, okay, I can see that he's working on, getting back to normalcy, just say, hey, I'm here for you, call me if you need me. That support system can help me get out of my trigger and back into whatever the group is doing at the time. If I don't have a friend in the group, then I'm left to do that on my own, as the group then tends to its original reason for coming together. Somebody new who's not a previous friend of mine could notice, oh, Sam is triggered, he's crying in the corner, he's not participating, he's leaning back, he's, sniffling, whatever, okay? Someone new could reach out and say, hey, are you okay? Right? So it doesn't have to be a previous friend. But I do think that respect for whatever the group was constituted to do, to meet, to give their time and attention for, clearly would be sidetracked by someone getting triggered in that group, unless the topic was triggers, okay? Very rare, all right? All right. So I do think that if I were respecting the time and attention of others in the group, I would try and bring myself back to an operational state where I could contribute without detracting from it. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or
so
without
that's
getting up
two
and walking
notions
out.
here. Two notions here. One, my responsibility. Two, whether or not friends really want to just willingly jump in without disrupting the group. Over.
Yeah.
Hey, Carl,
Yeah.
we're talking about upsets.
So I really agree that the ultimate responsibility is on the person. In entering a community, though, there's like these unspoken agreements, and I think that's where the agreements come in. And even within a group, there's different agreements among different members of the group. So I would say, the word discernment is really the word, because there are times that it may be important to interject and deal with somebody's trigger because it's going to add to future processes within the group and make things flow smoothly. So sometimes life comes up and it's better to deal with it right now because it would be worse not to. The other comment I want to make with the back channels, and I guess this is sort of like a PSA almost, when you're providing that kind of comfort to somebody, what you don't want to do is set up the subject of their trigger as the enemy. You want to be there to listen, but you don't want to start like becoming that mob. And that's what happens a lot of times in those back channels. So I think even when you're in the back channels, you should proceed as if one day your comments may well be read by the person that you're talking about.
I think I know the situation you're talking about.
No, I'm not. You couldn't, because I don't have one in mind.
But there are
I do.
many that fit the model.
I have many in mind, but I don't have one in mind.
Yeah, there are many that fit the pattern, though.
Absolutely, it is a pattern.
Yeah,
It is
so
a
you can pick the most recent one, or the most famous one, or the most notorious one.
Well, and I will tell you something. I'm not a betting person, but I could pretty much say that we've all played the roles of all of the different characters in those scenarios.
Yep. Which says that taking the story and making a caricature or an allegory out of it without naming names, but sort of made up characters is something that we all collectively do to make a caricature or a send up of this phenomenon.
Well, I always push towards that because it's much easier to be able to look at the characters and say, when have I played that role? When have I played that role? Even the things that we're not so proud of. But then if we could look at it in terms of the character's behavior, we don't have that same emotional reaction that causes defensiveness and triggers.
Yeah. Sam.
I said that
So
word
let-
for you, Sam.
Okay, it didn't trigger me. All right. So let me ask Barry,
Yeah,
given this conversation, okay, to me, the matter of upset in group discussions is not more complicated than this. So I'm wondering if you think there's more to it or whether we've kind of outlined it just like in the last 10, 15 minutes.
well, I think in these Zoom calls, they don't rise to any life-threatening level or, you know, or livelihood threatening level. There are cases in
Some
real
people
life
do
where
take
they,
it that way though. And there
well,
have been
yeah,
cases.
yeah. I mean, if it destroys your reputation as a contributor to a group, yeah, I suppose that's, I don't know if that's a livelihood threatening issue. I don't know if it rises quite that way, but maybe a reputation threatening issue. So yeah, I mean, it's not the you know, the atomic bomb level, but it's sometimes easier to process the sort of the milder version of it, and then that helps you figure out how would you handle the more challenging real life versions of it, where there's much more at stake. So it's how much is at stake? You know, can you just let it go and say, oh, okay, I'll accept the distress and sleep it off, or, you know, drink it off, or so yeah. It's at what level does the handling of it become so problematic that it renders one dysfunctional? Sam.
So in certain, and I'll use this word, orders or schools
Yeah.
or disciplines
Yeah.
or academies or studios, there is a readiness filter or assessment before one is allowed to participate in certain things.
Yeah.
I'll use one example, okay? I believe, and I heard this directly from someone in this organization, in the Mormon church, you are not allowed to enter certain rooms and participate in certain rituals until you reach, quote unquote, a certain level.
Yeah. Qualification. Yeah. Prerequisites.
So in certain martial arts, you're not allowed to learn certain trainings and participate in certain practices, you know, until you reach a certain level of maturity, both skill, physical skill, and mental and emotional readiness.
Yes, I get that.
So in organizations that are attempting to do certain kinds of collaboration, I believe it is valid to ask that very same question, to say, is someone ready to participate in this activity?
Yep. Yep.
And that is not necessarily judgmental. That is not necessarily power over. It's just understanding what readiness means and what non-readiness means also to the rest of those who are trying to do something.
Yep.
I agree, but I also think though, that there should be an equal opportunity pathway to get to readiness.
Say more about that, because I think most of these organizations I did mention have those paths.
I'm just talking in not even organization, whether it's an organization, whatever it is. I'm just trying to balance. Like I said something very similar to what you said. I don't think everybody should be included in the same way. And it was, you know, the other side, who that triggers are people that are afraid of exclusion. And I get that too. So I'm just saying, as long as there is an opportunity and a way to build those skills to be there if you want to be there,
Yep.
I have no problem with it. I think it makes sense.
Yep. Like, for example, you need to earn this set of badges, okay? These 7 out of 10 badges before you get to this level of Boy Scout or whatever that term is.
Eagle Scouts. Yeah.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because I also think there should be a placement test for somebody that hasn't earned all those badges.
Right, because they learned it somewhere else. And it's not
Exactly,
under the auspices of this organization.
exactly, exactly.
And that sort of ties into the phenomenon of becoming upset when somebody professes qualifications and competence that they don't deliver.
Yep. Yep.
Should we let Carl check in for a minute? We're at a good pause, I think.
Turn on your
Oh,
mic.
Before you do, can I ask you a question? Are you aware, or did you get the word that unblocking is no longer going to be at this time hosted by Doug, and he's moved unblocking? Were you in last Sunday's unblocking?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know. All right. So anyway, this was just an opportunity to try and do either a retrospective, in my opinion, okay, on whether unblocking or barn raising are going well or not going well, and possibly, gather some ideas for a new thing, which in particular I, but others could also consider launching.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. So well, I mean, it opens up the Sunday mornings for type of thing, and yeah, it was like just from what I was listening in on too. One of the things that it's almost like, I guess there's almost like maturity models and in certain areas. That's kind of what that was the thing that.
So Carl, can I ask you a question?
And then like with one of my communities there's this getting things done method with, there's a whole book and a whole set of practices around it. And we have a monthly meeting, and we have people that show up, and because they heard about the book, to people who've been practicing it for 20 years. So it's kind of people who come in new and haven't even read the book yet and stuff. They pretty much should just listen and stuff, and like start picking up terminology and can ask questions. But I mean, if we're having like an hour-long meeting, it's like we don't have time to like explain. It's not that's not the time to be like telling about the process. So I think yeah, it all depends on kind of what's the context for the group, and the whole set of norms and values and all those kind of things. So, and that the performing, storming, norming and stuff, you to go through that, you're going to go through the various stages. And as you said, triggers are just like generate a storming phase. So how do we resolve those issues and stuff? So I'll just stop with that, and we welcome Alex.
Can I ask you a question though, Carl?
Mm-hmm.
Since you were there, did Doug explain the rationale for moving the meeting, and in a sense, what I've heard was also taking it out of GCC in some way? Did you understand a rationale? Because I've heard one version, but I'm curious to hear another version.
Yeah, there's yeah, that's part of it. I mean, time-wise, Doug needs to be reclaiming Sundays for his own other purposes.
Yeah.
And
You want to
stuff.
reclaim Sundays from self and personal reasons.
Yeah, and also that yeah, I don't know. I guess from some of the stuff he was saying, he just felt that, I mean, it's with the name, that we really haven't been addressing the. Well, just it seems to, it's gone in, or there's just not, doesn't really seem to be like fit. Well, I mean, what is the GCC? I think it's been 5 years almost now. So I mean, this the whole kind of thing of retrospective and stuff. I mean, are we really gonna try to have active projects towards resolving global challenges, or what is the? I know we kind of had over the years we've had these different groups have sprung up, like the barn raising group, and then we had the Friday experiments, and And then Gertrude's
Appreciate his method.
appreciators and things. So, and then there's also the Thursday one that it was always a conflict for me and stuff. But that was the other group that Doug was kind of leading. So yeah, that's, well, I'll have to think about more, and then I'll let like the subsequent conversation here.
Yeah, time change was personal, and it didn't really fit within the scope of GCC. It was he always said it was kind of an independent thing. It didn't really need to be within the rubric of GCC. So he moved it for personal reasons and made it independent for a related or maybe unrelated reason.
Alex, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, there was at the beginning of the session, Doug talked about the day being of concern. He wanted to reclaim his Sunday space. So it seems like his motive was to move the meeting to a different day of the week. And that's what he's done effectively. But why is it? Maybe there's a deeper reason, but it just appeared to me on the surface to be you didn't like to have that on a Sunday. You wanted to move it to a day of the week over.
Okay, thanks. Stace?
So Sam, can we move this in a more productive way? I'd really like to hear what you're proposing as two possibilities to take over Sunday. Maybe we could discuss that.
Yeah, well, I had considered doing that, but I also said that this was kind of very impromptu. I didn't actually prepare anything other than, if you want, I have some thoughts on what would be a good knowledge repository that I've begun to adopt that is actually a very good platform for collaboration. But it requires that people learn a new platform, and thereby, there's going to be some resistance to it. But in my view, it is a truly effective platform for people who are doing very detailed collaboration work. Now, there's other kinds of collaboration work you could do that don't require this, although they also could take advantage of this. But I'm talking about, the software industry, for example, does very, very, very large scale collaboration globally. And they would not be able to do it in such an effective way without this platform. And by this platform, I'm talking about, a knowledge repository that manages source code and versions. It's called GitHub. And so I've set up 3 or 4 different repositories on GitHub. And I know it looks very different from what normal people would say, oh, this is what a collaboration platform looks like. However, my understanding of it is extremely powerful. It is extremely empowering. And it has been very effective. So I've done that. I put 3 or 4 things up there. One of them is a repo that contains the actual text from the September 30th, 2017 proposal to the GCC. And if you like, I can show you that. There's a few others as well. So that I could do if people are in agreement with Stacy that that's a good way to use this time.
So you're saying are you talking about this time, this next hour and a half, or are you talking about using Sundays as an opportunity to come together as a working group and use this platform that you're talking about, or learn it?
I'm still evolving some thoughts. I'm not concrete on them yet, but it does involve more artifacts, more doing, more visibility, more accountability, more prepared thinking, more execution, more discussion of co-visioning, more co-sense making, leveraging all the principles that have evolved in the last 5 or 6 years. So those are kind of the mishmash of ideas that are kind of trying to come together in this proposal I'm trying to make.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're almost proposing like a lab on Sundays to come and work.
Use whatever
in a
word
lab.
you like. Yes, you could use it as a lab because it will be, exploring things and experimenting with things. Yes.
I mean, I think that would be great, especially if you were, that would be an opportunity to invite some of the neighboring groups, some people in the neighboring groups. Because somebody like me, I may look on, I may pick up things, and who knows, I may participate, but I probably would not. However, there would definitely be people that I'm involved with in different groups that would be very interested in doing that.
Yeah.
And I like that idea because it would start meshing our communities together.
I think there's at least 5 or 6 communities like that I can think of immediately. You know, OGM is one. The
Right.
Knowledge Federation group is another. The Friends of Doug Engelbart around this organization called Next Now that Carl knows is another. Okay. The EOST group, you know, is another. So there's at least 4 right there, and I haven't even done a comprehensive survey of the groups that I'm aware of. Yeah, John Keldon, maybe that might be another one. Anyway, welcome, Joel. What brings you here today?
I just turned up, man. Have a look around.
Click on a Zoom link.
Joel, were you in last week's unblocking where the change got announced?
No, I haven't seen any of your meetings for a while.
So had you heard that the unblocking got moved?
No, I just saw your link up today.
Yeah, my understanding is, and I wasn't there last Sunday, is that Doug has moved unblockings to Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So this time was just being used right now by those of us who decided to come together on this particular day, just to talk about what's happened with unblocking, what's happened with barn raising, and what might we want to do differently or the same. And if you want to use an agile word, we can use an agile word.
Do you notice some people get disturbed about working on Sunday? And they think it should be a day of rest, but you know, we could use the time productively. Why not? Why waste it?
So let's ask this. There are, of course, I guess religions who don't like people working on Sundays. Are there people we know in our community that hold this view and therefore avoid Sundays?
I don't know anybody in this group who regularly attends religious services on Sunday at this hour. Joel,
No.
you do? Yes, no?
You're on mute,
I
Joe.
went to church every week for a while, but not at this hour. It's normally between 10 and 12. It's now nearly 5 o'clock time here.
Okay, yeah.
My church is the body, so if I'm awake, I'm at church. Over.
See, I myself
It is
grew up
Monday
without,
now it is Monday for part of the world too.
right. In fact, for Alex's world, right?
Yeah.
Early Monday morning, middle of the night.
So just to repeat something, I unfortunately still work at a day gig, Monday through Fridays. That makes irregular participation outside of work somewhat less predictable and less likely. So I only have weekends to do this extracurricular stuff. That's my own constraint.
Well, it's been Monday here for an hour and 3/4, a little over an hour and 3/4. So it's going to be a long day. But I work for my own hours. I work for myself, so I'm doing my own hours, and that means I don't have to abide by the 9 to 5 regime. I'm out of that rut.
Well, if I may, if we actually do establish something that allows us to collaborate asynchronously, where we don't actually have to be in the same room at the same time, then that does allow people to apply their time and attention whenever they have some to spare or to dedicate. So I think that's another reason that I think collaboration is in many ways enabled and empowered once we actually have better shared group memory and collaboration tools.
Yeah, so you have that course, shared repository or network of repositories.
Yep.
And then whatever group comes together at, at a particular time. I mean, there's this open space technology. One of the principles is whoever shows up is the right people. And my feeling is you have to, if you want to start anything new, you got to meet as frequently as possible. I mean, and things, and then it's whoever shows up, because you can't, even weekly sometimes, but I mean, I've had people, if you want to start something up monthly, it's like, I can't make it in April, you can't make it in May, all of a sudden it's like 3 months since we've talked to each other. That's, so, and then of course with the Engelbart stuff, I mean, it's about, everybody has their own augmentation system. So it's like augmented humans are, it's like your augmentation system meets my, or yeah, your augmentation system meets mine. So there's almost like well, there's the HLAMT, and one of the things I'm actually working on is there's a NICLAMT to the networked improvement community. So that's one of the things I'm looking at while I'm taking a break from school, is what are the improvement communities that are out there? And how
Crota pronounces that.
can we really network the improvement communities?
Yeah, Carl's talking a language I understand, but probably few people here are reading Engelbart that deeply. Stacy, then Alex, I guess.
Yeah, so I think what you propose is probably a really good idea. However, that being said, the things that we've worked on in GCC up until this point, the values, things like that, I think it's going to have to be tightened down a little bit, because I'm just using this as like an extreme example. But let's say someone who has Nazi tendencies wants to be part of the group. Let's say someone who is a known sexist wants to be part of the group.
Sexist or sex predator? Or
No, sexist.
Okay.
Sexist. I don't know of any, I don't think that would be an issue with predators. I think we would all be in agreement, but I'm just saying, unless there's ways to handle how these things are, be taken care of. I mean, we started off talking about, triggering in our smaller conversation. What about in the bigger ones? That's important. Yeah, I don't want to go into any details, but as we get bigger, those issues are more important, because we don't have the closer relationships that we might have right here, where we
Right.
read each other better, things like that.
So Alex, may I respond to Stacy, since I have a direct point on that one?
Yeah.
Stacy, one of my early points I made way back on almost day 0, and I've continued to make all along, is I don't personally myself subscribe to this everybody's invited, everybody's welcome idea. I do think that if you want to do that, you have to impose certain rules and restrictions, but the lack of rules and restrictions and guidelines and the all inclusion doesn't work. And we've seen that it doesn't work, okay? And it's easy to describe why it doesn't work. So for me, we've done in this session already an exploration of what it means to be prepared for collaboration, prepared for interaction, prepared for, whatever comes up. And there's readiness that we've talked about. And so I think probably principle 0 in collaboration, in my view, is you don't have to collaborate with everybody. The thinking that you have to collaborate with everybody is foolhardy in my view. So I don't think that whatever I'm going to create, doesn't matter, whether any of you want to create something else, but whatever I create is not going to be all inclusive in that same way that we've tried to be here in GCC to date.
Right, but what are you going to do when you have 2 collaborators that are at odds with each other?
We figure it out.
Well,
And
this
if
is
they're
what I'm
already
saying.
in the community, they're coming with a certain level of readiness and preparedness, and the community will have had some protocols or some guidelines about what's acceptable and what's not.
Right, but I'm sorry, Alex, just one more thing, because the only reason I'm bringing it up is because we're talking about going outside the community.
No, I'm not.
Oh, I thought I thought we were talking about going outside GCC. That's the
I'm not.
community I'm talking. You just said that. You just said that there are other groups and you mentioned 4
Oh,
other groups.
right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, in that respect, yes, I will be making those connections, yes.
That's what I'm talking about. Sorry, Alex.
If we've got a open global group, you don't join it because everybody's already a member. It's the global membership group. We're not a member of that group. We're a different organization. We're the GCC. And if we have a group here, then it's a thing. It's not an open collaboration. It's a GCC specific group with a specific ideal and a moderator who has duties and has been allocated these duties by the group to enforce the rules governing who can join and who is a agitator, cannot join. We're time wasters. So, you know, there's a group I belong to, the local community group. They want a half an hour a month, approximately, of my time to respond to requests and answer questions. And I don't mind giving that because it's a good cause. But, you know, the global collaboration is an important thing on my agenda too, and I'm willing to give more time to the global collaboration challenge than I am to some of these other groups that I'm a member of. I'm willing to up the ante because of the importance of the issues for the global summit, you know, for the global climate change discussion, and for the consensus agreement regarding how we govern the national economies of some of these greedy countries that are creating war, which 98% of the people don't want. Over.
Barry?
Just a quick comment before you go, Barry.
Sure.
The thing that you say exists, Alex, I think does not yet exist in the formal way that you just described. I think that's an ideal that you may have in your mind, and some of us others may share, but it doesn't currently exist, in my view. Barry?
Yeah, I just want to point out there's an actual example that some of us here may know about. Eugen Oettinger proposes to start up something called the Law of Nature Manifesto and getting Einstein into organizations, which is kind of overlapping concept. And he had a devil of a time getting people to commit. He had people show up at the beginning, but I think he said only like at the end of the introduction, only one person, basically himself, was willing to stay committed. Everybody else was sort of on the fringe. And so it went from 100% to 10% to 1% is the way he put it. And that's not an uncommon phenomenon, that after you're in something for a while, you sort of drift away because you don't have that much to contribute or that much time to contribute, or the problem is too challenging and it's going to take too much time and effort. And you realize that after you take a look at it. And a lot of problems that I've looked at have turned out to be intractable problems that have afflicted humankind for millennia, which I didn't realize at the beginning until I found out how long these issues have been plaguing humankind and why it turns out that they're so intractable and you can't get people to cooperate. Everybody goes their own way eventually.
Carl, then Alex.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Alex, you were interrupted by me, so you actually had your hand up earlier.
I'll just quickly, the proposal, whatever proposal comes about, would need a set of values and guidelines. So that's where I go back to the 12 steps or the 12 principles of human conduct. The 4 principles, and there's the 5 principles, and there's a whole range of them, but a select few of those would guide us in the direction we unanimously want to head. Over.
Yeah, so I was just looking, we have, well, there's a Facebook group called Global Challenges Collaboration, which has 1,619 people who have joined. There's I haven't really been involved in administering it. I know at one point we had we asked people questions for people, and then it's like if people don't even answer the questions, they're kind of self-selecting that they're on the fringe and stuff, or we type of thing. And then it's like, so out of 1,619 people, how many people actually show up? I mean, collectively to, just even the weekend, just barn raising and this, it's like a handful. So it's that 90 to 9 to 1 rule. I first saw it in Clay Shirky's Here Comes Everyone or Everybody and stuff. But that's so what we've got the and it's not too long, it's not too far in advance. We got, like, was it September 30th? It'll be the 5th anniversary of GCC as an entity. So, what we want to have, like a 5-year, some kind of retrospective or prospective, and where do we want to be in the next 5 years, kind of thing, or have some kind of event around that. That would be one thing we could organize. That.
So may I be a little bit sarcastic or sardonic on that point? Alex is shaking his head. I'm going to go ahead anyway. I have a very good friend, Kimberly, who says in all efforts, you can either be a good example or a horrible warning. And if we've not been a good example, then we're examples of what not to do and what not to be. And the good news on that front is we have thousands of hours of us not doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Despite our best intentions, our best practices, we've come together and not really created that which any of us has really wanted to see. But I at least am happy that we've got all these thousands of hours of case study where smarter people can come by and say, oh, this is where they went wrong. And I think there's value there.
And I think there's a good mixture. I think there's some good things in there.
And then there's the history books of world history, which have lots more examples than just this group of things that went haywire and didn't pan out.
Yeah. Yep. And if it were easy, we'd have done it by now.
Yeah.
Or other organizations would have done it by now. But you go look at other organizations, I doubt that many of them doing much, much better. Not if they start from the same ground rules of let's listen to everybody. All voices are welcome. Let's emerge some practices. Now, I can see organizations being effective when we take the old model, as Doug says, the old industrial model. I'm in charge. I'm going to tell you what to do. Here's the 6 projects. You're in charge of that one. You're in charge of that one. We meet on Tuesdays. You come with your action items done, all that sort of thing. We know how that can work. Many of us have experience in those models. But for global effectiveness, we're trying to experiment, or I've been trying to experiment with how autonomous entities, where I don't pay you, you don't pay me, and can we come together and stick together, or do we bounce off each other because of smart people problems or dumb people problems? Lengthy lists on both sides.
I just want to say, beware of the strong bias towards doing rather than being.
I don't know what that means. I really seriously, after
means-
5 years, don't know what that means.
Okay, so what I mean by it is that it seems to me that you're measuring results of doing and not as able to see the positive contributions to being and developing and loving and caring and those things.
I think you're putting words in my mouth. I think there's been a lot of value that we have created here. I'm just kind of being the sardonic devil's advocate from many who come here and say, you guys aren't doing anything. I don't believe that myself.
What I'm saying is both of those things have to be balanced.
Yes.
Have to?
The do
For
it
an
and not.
accurate picture, yes. I'm sorry, Alex. Yes, for an accurate picture, both of those things have to be considered. Yes.
From a military strategy perspective, you've got doers and non-doers in the mix. And if you want an open network, you've got to be welcoming to them. You need a strategic strategy to get them involved. Over.
May I ask a question?
Please.
There's a conflict in Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people are being murdered. Are they going to be assisted via action, or are they going to be assisted by being?
Probably being would have been more helpful, because what you have to
We're talking
understand.
now. We're talking now.
But I am talking now because I think that we have to recognize there are a lot of people in Russia, outside of Russia, that actually think there is a good reason for this invasion. We might not think that. I don't think that. But there are other people that are seeing it totally different. So,
Right. So how do we resolve this? Are we going to just be, or are we going to actually get together, get on planes, get across the table and talk? Which is doing.
well, talk is doing. But again, think even the thought that talk is doing reflects a certain amount of being to get to that point.
That's what I'm saying. I don't understand the difference. What is being without doing?
When all is said and done, a lot
No,
more.
I really want an answer to this question. I
Said
really
than
want an
done.
answer to this question.
So when I'm using the word being, I'm talking about the process of becoming more and more conscious of what we are. That's the best way. You're asking me to
Okay,
describe.
so we
something
have a
very
model of what we
abstract.
are already, right? We have a 14 billion years evolved model of what we are.
No,
another
we
few-
don't.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
So then that's where we disagree. So it doesn't make sense to go further in the
8
conversation.
billion of us each
We're
have a
not
notion
even
of
at
what
the
we
same
are,
starting point.
right? 8 billion of us each have a notion of what we are. Do we all have to say, oh, no, stop, all 8 billion of us, you're wrong. Let's do something else.
Joel, do you want to say something?
Well,
We tend to be wrong about ourselves all the time. And others.
not always.
I still can't find people who truly judge the other religions or religions accurately. I really struggle to find it. Either they don't know something about another religion, they misunderstand what the religions are teaching, they look at the faults of the religions and then judge the religions for those reasons. I know the history of this Russian-Ukrainian war. Russia said for years, don't encroach any further, and the West just kept going. It was obvious they'd eventually start a war, but they just kept going anyway. We claim we're spreading peace and freedom, but I don't feel like I live under freedom. I don't know what the answer is. I just know, to me, from my perspective, most of the world doesn't have a clue.
Alex,
Yeah,
and then I'd like to respond to Joel.
there's two kinds of action. One's a political act, and that involves a lot of talking, discussion and talking and debating. That's political action. Then there's real action in the world that's community involved, physical action that changes things, also changes things. I mean, political talking and discussion changes things if there's enough people supporting these politicians who are going for the change, because they don't get into power to make the change unless they're supported by the people. So that's democracy, which is broken in the USA. But getting back to this difference between talking and acting, we judge people by their actions, not their words, because you can say things you don't mean. You can bullshit all you like, but unless you prove yourself by acting out in the world and doing some of these things and taking some responsibility, you're full of shit. That's what I mean by the difference between somebody who loves to say stuff but not do it. Over.
Barry's
you,
hand
Liz.
is up.
Barry?
I think when you're relatively young and inexperienced, you're much more likely to jump in and try to do something that you imagine is going to make things better. And as you gain experience doing things, you discover that a lot of things don't make things better. Sometimes they even make them worse. And so the more experience you have, the less eager you are to do something without being very, very confident it's going to be effective. And you kind of get to this Zen Buddhist concept that if everything that you can think of makes it worse, then the optimal strategy is to intentionally do nothing other than maybe think about it or try to figure out, why is everything you're using failing? But ultimately you end up intentionally doing nothing when everything you've tried and thought of has been ineffective at best and counterproductive at worst. And there are problems that have that feature, including war.
So may I respond to that?
Please.
Pardon me, Barry, but I think that's too simplistic. Those are not the
Best
only
I
options.
got. It's the best I got. I'm a simple-minded character.
No, I mean, if you go to Southeast Asia, the monks are doing their monk things, but they still rely on the villagers supporting them. The villagers are actually doing things to help those who are in Zen meditation or whatever, okay? So I still repeat my sincere question, which is, what is being without doing? You cannot be without doing, not as a human. You can if you're a rock, I guess, but I don't think we're rocks.
Is
And
thinking an instance of doing? Just
yes,
research?
it's very
Rock-
active doing,
Okay.
Roll down the hill.
Then-
very
then-
active doing,
And I
okay?
spent my whole life almost my whole life doing research.
Yes. And you've probably assisted, certain scales of communication in some way, right?
Yeah. Help
Setting
identify
aside the
things.
fact that you helped AT&T make a profit, but you're still helping people communicate.
Yeah.
Right.
Finding out things that fail and understanding why they fail and why they're counterproductive
Right.
is a useful thing to do. But it means less doing in the, the outbound.
Right.
Doing.
Right. However, I do want to respond to Joel, because Joel has made many good points. But the one on religion, I think for me, there's an easy distinction to make. If religion teaches you how to be a good person, I'm all for it. If religion teaches you to actually engage in hostility towards others or to oppress others, then I think that religion needs to either grow up or change or evolve.
Yeah.
Now, if we value lives, if we value other people's lives, that's a key assumption, okay? You could say, I really don't value those lives. I only value those lives who are like mine, like part of my community or part of my church or part of my religion or part of my tribe or part of my whatever, family. Yeah, there are people that do not value other people's lives as much. And I know this is actually quite the case in China, for example. Certain lives are just not valued in China. But if you do value human life, then these religions do have to grow up or just disappear, in my view. And I'm very willing to engage on these discussions. And I'm not well read on all of those religions, but I do know that they do instigate oppression, they do instigate violence. And you can shake your head, but historically that's been true, Joel. Over.
Fools do that.
What?
The fools. The ones who aren't true to the faiths.
Right, but they still claim that faith and they use that faith to gain their power.
Doesn't make them true to that faith.
That's true. I agree with that. Just like those who say, oh, I'm a great capitalist, are basically, you know, undermining capitalism. Those who are saying they're true to democracy are undermining democracy. I'm just as appalled by them. Doesn't mean it's not happening. Carl?
Ugh, yeah, things have changed so much since I initially raised my hand and stuff, but yeah, I mean, there's a distinction. If you really, if you're going to look at religions, I mean, there's things out there they talk about like a perennial wisdom or whatever, but people that do everything contrary, like given today and stuff, people who do exactly the opposite of Jesus of Nazareth did are not Christian, you know. I mean, it's like you got the perversion of things. I mean, you've got the so I mean, it's if people actually followed, and that kind of gets, I guess, to the being and doing too, because if you really have that clear sense of being, then there's the are you resonating with, is your being, your whole self, are you resonating with your actions? Are your actions really, you know, and that's where we have the total disconnect and stuff. I mean, yeah, I've been coming much and more into but it's about like there's like a coherence and stuff, and when people have like a coherent worldview and things, then things seem to just be either it's just like recognizing it and you recognize the connections between things, or I mean, I was just in a meeting yesterday. We were talking about being pragmatic and things, and so it's just how to go forward. And then, as I said, I mean, it's my take on things is that there's some point in the future you're going to have events, like you've got annual events type of thing. What's your presence going to be at that event that's coming up in, you know, X number of months and stuff? That's where you have some little piece of control or whatever. And then it's like, if enough of us are moving towards you know, working together for whatever can emerge at that particular event, that's how you can contribute towards. So that's kind of underlying my thought process now. And so I'm taking a break from my doctoral studies for the rest of the year and really kind of going back to the fundamentals. That's where I'm at now.
Barry, I know your hand is up, but Carl, I got to confess, could you succinctly summarize the point you were trying to make? Because I found that hard to follow.
Not at this time.
Okay.
Maybe I can help sharpen this up. Because I hear a lot of complaints about religion, and I think those complaints are well founded, but I draw a distinction between theology and religion or church. In the same sense that I draw a distinction between the protocols of the scientific method and the practice of science. I admire and respect a lot of ideas in theology, and also observe that people who claim to be adherents to the theology depart from it quite lamentably in their practice. And the same is true in science, that I admire, respect, and attempt to adhere to the protocols of the scientific method, and I and other would-be scientists commonly depart from it. And so we're not doing science in the kosher way. And it's much easier to see that in religion than it is to see it in science, but the same is true in both cases. And so this disconnect between the abstract concept, which may be valid. There's a lot of valid stuff in theology, but reducing to practice, people go awry all different kinds of ways without realizing it, even when they're told they're departing from the abstract principles. So yeah, I think, you know, religion can be criticized, so can the practice or the malpractice of science.
What Barry said.
It's been said by theologians that human beings are religious by nature, which is an interesting comment, because no matter which path you choose, you have this tendency to adopt a faith or a trust in superstitions and evaluating events due to confirmation bias, which reinforces your faith. And this is because we are religious creatures by nature. So it's not a religion that's bad, it's the adherence to fundamental beliefs in particular cults. Thank you. Over.
Okay, so I'm not a great student of theology, so thereby you could disregard everything I'm about to say. However, I will say it anyway. Okay, between theology and the scientific principles, Barry, to me there seems to be a distinction, but you could educate me. What is the method by which theologians get together and ascertain truth? Because in scientific principles there is a method, and despite how many, whether it's 99% or 99.999%, it doesn't matter who abuse and corrupt that method, there's at least a method where someone could come and say, okay, according to this method, I can weed through all this bullshit and all this crap. Is there such a method in theology? And if so, please educate me, because I'm not myself aware of it at the moment. That's question number one.
Okay.
Question number two is this whole notion of, are we religious by nature? It's an interesting use of the word, because I can see that the search for explanation, the search for meaning, is probably ubiquitous. Now, if you want to call that religion or religious, call it that way, but that's how I would define it. I think everybody wants an explanation, wants a sense of meaning out of their community, their world, their universe, whatever, okay? That doesn't necessarily mean whatever idea is given you, you have to glom onto and hold the rest of your life. That's one of the nice things about scientific principles. You can evolve that over time as you observe more, as you learn more. Is there such a method in theology?
Yeah, there is, but it's more challenging because in science began with understanding things where you could make very precise predictions and get very deterministic results, not results that were probabilistic in nature. The more probabilistic is the model, the harder it is to know if you got the best theory. So as science moved into the soft sciences, psychology and medicine and ecology and so on, it became harder and harder to know if your science was correct, because you had to collect an enormous amount of data and do a lot of statistical analysis. So theology began with trying to figure out what are the best practices for living so that you can live a life of well-being. And again, you could observe the results, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but you had a very, very loose statistical population of results. There is a branch of theology called analytic theology. And analytic theology is essentially what you and I would call an application of systems thinking. And in systems thinking, we look for best practices in very complex systems where the outcome is not deterministic. And analytic theology is essentially an instance of modern secular systems thinking. If you go to Harvard and John Rawls' theory of justice, it's totally secular. But John Rawls' theory of justice could be argued to be an instance of analytic theology, because you're looking for ethical best practices. The same is true with Girard's model. Girard was a professor humanities at Stanford. And he studied lots of literature, including stories from literature, stories from history, and stories from scripture. And he pulled out an analytical model of how humans behave. And that could be considered not just systems thinking, but another instance of analytic theology, because Girard's model, if you solve it for ethical best practices analytically, in the secular sense, you come out with recommended best practices which agree with the teachings of the world's great religions.
So how is that theology?
Because that's its origin. It turns out that I went back saying, how far back in history can I find systems thinkers using the same, what Howard Gardner calls the ninth intelligence. You know, Howard Gardner has this list that's now up to, I think, 10 varieties of intelligence. And the one that he was most reluctant to add.
Howard or Martin?
Say again?
Howard Gardner or Martin Gardner?
Howard Gardner, the one he's still alive, not Martin Gardner, the Scientific American guy. Howard Gardner has his theory of multiple intelligences. And the one he was most reluctant to add, he finally did add, and he named it existential intelligence, thinking about how to maintain the existence of a system that's sustainable. And that is a modern secular application of the ninth intelligence. And I look at that and I say, how far back in history can you find examples of people doing existential intelligence, existential thinking? And the first ones, 3,500 years ago, were the theologians. Now, they weren't using modern secular systems thinking as we understand it, the way it's taught, say, at Stanford, but fundamentally, it's the ninth intelligence. And I wrote this up and I said, the ninth intelligence is very powerful. Its roots go back to theology.
I'll go you one better on that. I believe the scientific principles also find their roots in theology.
Yes, they do.
They also were attempts to explain the universe and the world and the way we live in it, but they've found that it's not necessarily rooted in theism.
Oh, whether you need a deity or not. Well, there are theologies that don't have deities. You don't need a deity. The reason that they have deities is because if you're going to tell a story, if you're going to present very graduate level abstract material to a general audience, it helps to convert it into a story. So you have like Aesop's fables where he uses animals as characters. If you're going to translate it into a story form, it's sometimes convenient to imagine a superhero who is error-free in his analytical thinking, and that's the deity. And a lot of people get upset when you introduce the deity because it's as if this is a real character, like Spider-Man or Superman's a real person. So you have this imaginary character who's omniscient and all this kind of stuff. At some point, you outgrow the need for the storybook version of it, and you want to go to the analytic version. And so you get to Taoism and Buddhism and maybe a few others that omit the deity and just do it with the abstraction. So the bridge between the deity character in the stories and the abstraction is what Raymond Smullyan calls the process of enlightenment. So the process of enlightenment in Raymond Smullyan's version is the abstract version of the deity in the more elementary presentations of this. And so Einstein's deity is the deity of what's this guy's name? Remind me. But it's an abstraction. It's a process, not a storybook character. Go ahead, Sam.
So I'm still looking for the answer. What is that method in theology which attempts to elicit truth among smart theologians with small disagreements that is analogous to the scientific method in the scientific principles?
All right. So
what
if you
is
look
that
at
methodology?
If you look in the literature, the equivalent of the journals that you find in science is what I think they call it the midrash. It's
Not the journal, not the journals, not the artifacts, the method of thinking, the methodology.
It's conversation among the thinkers to try to
No. It's not just conversation. There's got to be a method to the conversation. I can't just shoot the shit over a beer and
It's not
say
shooting
we're
the
doing
shit over a
theology.
beer. It's like how you do philosophy. Philosophers do the same thing. Pose a philosophy, and then other people will review it and comment on it, and philosophy gets refined by the very same process that the theologians did it over something like, I don't know, 3,000 years or so.
I mean, isn't that what Sam just did before when he said, when he asked everybody for what they thought happened on Sundays on blocking?
Yeah.
And
You're gathering information and trying to sort through what's reliable information, what's worth believing, and what's worth discarding as misconceptions.
Yeah, but how do you apply that filter? How do you make that judgment? How do you make that discernment?
This pretty much the same way. When I try to do it in theological topics, I use the same method of reasoning that I use in scientific disciplines. Try looking for the evidence, deciding whether or not the evidence can be, or the hypothesis can be falsified, or whether there's evidence to support it, and whether it makes reliable predictions. So it's fundamentally the same process, except it's a much foggier set of issues, because the way humans behave is a really complex system and really hard to predict. But it doesn't mean it's totally made up.
So are
It
you
just
saying
takes-
that logic is also at the core?
Yes, absolutely.
Analytical theology?
Yeah. Analytic theology uses a lot of logic, and it's basically model-based reasoning.
Okay.
You make a
Jerry,
model.
How many people today who believe and embrace a lot of religions would even agree with that statement?
How many? Say that again. How many people? What?
How many people who embrace religion
Embrace
and
religion.
religious teachings actually would agree with you that at its core is logic?
I don't know.
I see Joel raising his hand, okay, which is encouraging to me. But can you believe that Trump would agree with you, for example?
Oh no, Trump would never
That
agree with me on
any of
anything.
these other idiots that claim that they're evangelical Christians would even think about logic being at the core? Because if they did, where does that hypocrisy then come from?
but Sam, you don't really think Trump is religious, do you?
Hey, there is 44 million people who embrace his position.
But we're talking about the individual. He's not, I don't think he would fall into that category.
Trump
He's
is not a
I mean,
critical
He's a
thinker.
manipulator.
He's not a
exactly.
But there's a
what I'm
lot of
saying.
idiots out there that believe him.
Yes.
Right, but I'm not talking about the idiots that believe him. You're asking a question about people who embrace religion, and then you're saying Trump
Yet
is
his
one of those
followers
people.
are embracing his religion.
The
Are we
followers think
talking
he
about
is
his
God.
followers, or are we talking about him? I thought we were
I'm
talking
talking about the 44 million that are preventing,
Okay, but that's
progress
not-
to be made in this country.
Okay, but that's not people embracing religion.
They are. They claim they are.
Well, that's the difference between
Not
religion and
every-
theology. There's a huge chasm between religion and theology. Theology is a very rarely arcane, abstract discipline, and most people who are religious do not embrace theology. They simply receive the teachings or the practices from the preachers, and the preachers are a lot of preachers are malpracticing theology, just as a lot of would-be scientists
Mhm.
are malpracticing science and getting
Exactly.
incorrect results.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I've seen the work of theologians pointing out that religions are the vehicles of control and power, and the deities and the having to open your heart to the faith and all that is about getting a larger flock to build a bigger church, to raise money and spread the word. And it's like a cult. And the theologians point out that this is part of the religious dogmatism that happens when fundamentalism creeps into a faith, and somebody holds up a book saying, these are the words of the great deity, these are the words of the master, when in fact the words can be found, the words of the great deity and the master in any religion or philosophy can be found by the individual looking within, finding it in your own meditation and analyzing your own heart, your own thoughts, your own conscience, your own emotions and feelings. They give you the answers you're looking for, because that's the free will that you're supposed to be using. Why would I expect you to do something that I want you to do if I gave you free will beforehand? I don't. I want you to do what you want to do. I want you to use that free will to your best advantage. It's that's I'm talking about what God would say. I often get in a situation and I've got a problem, I've got to make a choice, and I say, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? You know, the guy they crucified for throwing the money lenders out of the temple. Over.
There's a very faint, well, in American annals of philosophy, Raymond Smullyan, whose name I just mentioned a minute ago, is probably one of the highest rated logicians and taught logic in philosophy at the college level. And everything that he writes is rooted in rigorous but challenging logic. And one of his famous pieces, which appeared in a book by Hofstadter and Dennett, is entitled "Is God a Taoist?" And it's just simply a Socratic dialogue between two imaginary characters named Mortal and God. And the mortal begins by saying, "Dear God, if you have 1 ounce of mercy for this, your poor mortal creature, please relieve me of the burden of having free will." And then there ensues this dialogue that Raymond Smullyan writes about why the mortal has free will. And it's really it's a really interesting dialogue to read because it's strictly done with Socratic logic. And the character who's using the Socratic logic is the one whose name is God in this dialogue. So yeah, you can find a very rigorous but challenging logic in theology. It's rare, but it's there.
And yet, in most institutions where there is quote unquote religion, logic is not welcome.
Yeah, because it's
Question about-
graduate level, and you can't do logic with people who don't have the critical thinking skills to process it. So what do? You go to story mode instead. You try to find allegories and parables and stories that can get across the idea without giving the logical proof, because the logical proof is simply too much over their head to follow.
So I'm willing to accept that there is a core of theology, and you call it analytical theology, which actually is attempting to push the envelope of our understanding of the universe. Okay.
Yes.
But the practice of much of what falls into this category called religion,
Yeah.
in my mind, in the balance, is
Departs.
grotesquely negative.
Yeah, it departs from
Grotesquely negative.
Oh yeah, if you want to say grotesquely, it departs in a lamentable fashion from the theology. It's very, I mean, the theology is technically so arcane that it's graduate level work. How many people can do graduate level work and do it accurately without making, rookie mistakes?
What more?
Go ahead, Alex. I'll ask you a question later.
What could be more important than your own life if you're doing work on yourself? And that's graduate work because you're the master of your own destiny. So, see, I went through recovery and I had to make some hard decisions about how important it was. Was I doing the right thing or not? And over a period of years, I became more adapted working out this problem and discovering which direction I needed to take. And I couldn't use religion because of my atheism. I was a card-carrying atheist, believing in evolution and life arising spontaneously by accident in the primordial soup. But evolution has brought us to the stage we're at now. And I was saying to myself, well, if all these people in this recovery group have found a solution to their issues by using a belief in a power greater than themselves, then I should be able to do it too. And I used a few different tricks, a few different methods they suggested. One was fake it till you make it. But I was having a deal with this power greater than myself and trying to argue theological points and discuss issues that are important to me in my own private prayer time, in my own meditation time. I discovered that there's an observer present. This observer that's present is always present because I'm alive. It's part of me. It's my personal observer, and I call it God. Over.
Yeah. It's an abstraction, but you can treat the abstraction as a storybook character if that works. Sam?
My question to you, Barry, would be this. I believe that most high school kids are capable of understanding the scientific method. When you
Yeah.
say that analytical theology is graduate level work,
Yeah,
you're
it is.
saying basically it's not accessible to people at the high school level. They must wait another 4 to 10 years before they can understand that. What I'm saying is, why must it be so?
There are kids in high school who can do college level work, but they're like the top 1%?
No. I'm not talking about the 0.5%. I'm talking about most high school kids can understand scientific principles. And you're
But not
saying
but
most
not
high school
practice.
kids could not understand the principles of analytic theology. Is it really that complicated?
I think the level of thinking that is, it's like following a proof. You can be presented with a Pythagorean theorem without understanding the proof and just accept it on faith that the expert, is giving you a true statement.
But then that's not really mathematics.
Sorry?
That's not really mathematics. If you just tell somebody it's true without showing them why it's true, that's not mathematics.
That's why a lot of people don't really get mathematics. They will use the rule because they're advised to use it because, quote, it gives the right answer, but it doesn't give the right answer on the surface of the earth.
That's bad teaching. There are
It is.
400 different proofs of the Pythagorean theorem. If
And
a
they
teacher
only-
doesn't know one, they're a bad teacher.
And they only apply to a flat surface. They don't apply to a curved surface.
Of course, that's the presumption,
Right.
but that doesn't invalidate it.
No, the point is they don't even know not to apply it to celestial navigation or global
That's bad
navigation.
teaching. That's
If it-
bad teaching.
They don't
One-
even mention it. I
one
had
two,
to
do you-
learn. I had to learn celestial navigation on my own in my 30s
Yeah.
because it was never in any courses I took.
You got to be able to make the jump from 2D to 3D. That's
Yeah,
all.
you have to use spherical trigonometry. You
You
can
don't have
barely
to do
you
anything.
can barely
The
teach
Pythagorean
trigonometry.
theorem applies in a two-dimensional space. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, spherical trigonometry is, as far as I know, is not taught in high school. I didn't even learn that it existed until I was in my 30s. And it turns out that spherical trigonometry was developed by the Arabic mathematicians 1,000 years ago. And it's the basis for celestial navigation. I didn't even know it existed.
Sam loves trigonometry.
Say
He
what?
Sam gets triggered by mathematics.
Yeah. How many people here have ever even heard of the opportunity to take a course in spherical trigonometry? Triangles on the surface of a sphere.
Yeah. Well, there's a big issue in trigonometry, and that is how to square a circle. One of those issues that prop up a lot, like finding the square root of
Yeah,
something.
that's Euclidean geometry, not trigonometry.
Yeah, that's not 3D.
Oh, here comes Joshua. Let's let him in.
Barry, I'm laughing. I don't know if you remember a long time ago, we had a conversation. I was asking you to help me figure out how many triangles. Do you remember?
I need more recollection than what you're offering.
Not important. Hello, Joshua.
How many
Anyway, my earlier
triangles?
question to you, Barry, was still, if the core of analytic theology requires a graduate level education to think, whereas the scientific principles are accessible to pretty much all with a high school level of understanding, then why is it so? Where is the complexity in analytic theology? And why is it there? And why does it take so long for anyone to even begin to approach it?
For the same reason they don't teach ethics in high school. You have to teach
No,
ethics
no,
in college.
wait. Don't generalize like that. My high school did teach some ethics. So it's not universal. There are schools that teach social, practices and sociology and how to be a good person and all that. So it is not complex to say, in fact, the person who wrote Everything I Learned in Kindergarten, Christian Fulgham or Robert Fulgham, he was
Fulgham,
at my high school, by the way. He's the author of that book. So when you want to teach ethics, you don't have to teach it at the graduate level. You can teach it to kindergartners.
And does that make them an ethical person?
It's a start because of what I'm
It's
talking
a
about.
start, yes.
They can understand it. It's possible to understand sharing at the kindergarten level.
Yeah. And then in practice, they depart from it.
It's possible to understand bullying at any level, especially middle school level.
Yeah. And then people
So
depart.
it's not something that needs to be reserved until you're a graduate in some theology department somewhere.
Yeah, standing over psychologically is violence.
I mean, they teach arithmetic, but I'm terrible at arithmetic. I make addition errors all the time, even though I understand the concepts. I depart from the practice because I'm a sloppy thinker.
So
When
you're
it comes to
saying we
certain,
need ethical calculators that we all have in our pockets to tell us
it
what
would be
to do.
nice if we had it, but what are you going to put in as the data? Where are you going to get the data? At least in arithmetic, you can attempt to put the correct numbers in. Even there, I type in the wrong numbers without realizing it. So you can. In fact, I had a calculator made by Marchant that made arithmetic errors.
I've got an ethical calculator in my heart. That does me fine. It suits me to the T. It always gives the right answer. Over.
How would you know?
Because it's not in my head. When I go to my head for the answers, I usually end up with the confirmation bias and the ego involved. That
Yeah,
gives
I
me
get that part, but how do you know that the other answer is correct, except by experience?
personal feelings. It's
Yeah,
my
feelings.
my
But
bias.
feelings aren't facts on the ground. They're affective states, which can
Yeah.
vary over time and do vary over time. So they
Yeah,
can't.
But I know there's a fact involved when I feel good. I know that it's a good feeling. That's a fact.
But
when
does
I
that mean the
feel-
other guy? Does that mean the other guy feels good?
That means when I feel bad, I can make a comparison and I know that bad feeling is not wanted. And I can see other people who feel good and bad.
How can you be sure that you're getting all the data?
Well, you can't be sure. You have
Yeah,
to make,
exactly. You can't
you
be
have to
sure.
you have to use something from your heart, this knowledge from your heart to make the right judgment.
You do the best you can, but it's not guaranteed to be optimal.
That's correct.
I make suboptimal practices and mistakes all the time, even though I'm trying as best I can to do the optimal thing. And I find that something I thought was optimal isn't. It's wrong. I find out after I've tried it.
Practice makes perfect. Prevention's
okay.
better.
I'm
Prevention's better than
77 years
cure.
old and I'm still not perfect. I've been practicing for almost 8 decades. So
I'm trying to keep a list of mistakes that I make and
Yeah.
errors I encounter so
Science
that they're
does the
not
same thing.
repeated.
Yeah,
If they're not
science does
repeated,
science does the same thing. Science keeps track of its mistakes and tries to correct them.
Yeah. Well,
And we all do that. Some are harder to diagnose. The hardest stuff to diagnose takes the longest to figure it out. Go ahead, Sam.
If I might pop back out a couple of stacks here, I think this is about truth, okay? And what I was asking about is how does theology or analytic theology lead us towards truth? Whereas I believe I understand how the scientific method leads us towards truth. And moreover, certain institutions, like I'll cite certain religions, lead us far from the truth, despite the core of analytic theology. So if we value truth, then we must look at the impacts of some of these religions and some of these practices and what they really instill in people and how they behave. And that is the larger impact in my mind.
Yeah, humans are very error prone, full of misconceptions, even when there's literature to overthrow a misconception. Misconceptions can persist for thousands of years, even though there's very reliable literature to overthrow it.
Got that. But the point I'm trying to make is the scientific method has a way to weed out that crap. And what I'm
Yes.
looking for is what is that way in analytic theology? And why
Scientific
must I wait
method
till I'm a
came from
graduate
mystics.
in a theology department before I can actually be taught that?
because of the money.
Because they don't teach
No,
theology.
come on, those are easy excuses.
They don't teach theology in public school because it's against the law to teach theology in public school, including analytic theology. Now, they can teach systems thinking, but they have to be careful of the vocabulary that they teach secular systems thinking and don't point out that it has synonyms in analytic theology. They have to use separate nomenclature and vocabulary. What are you pointing at?
Stacy had a hand up.
Stacy, do you
Thank
want to
you.
say something?
She's on the phone.
No, not on the phone.
Oh, the
Not-
iPad. iPad. Oh, you've got the settings in black bars next to your image. So it means you've got your video settings not on high quality. You've got them set on some other quality.
Go ahead, Stacy.
I don't even remember what I wanted to say. It's all connected though. Let me just, so earlier you were saying how the method used was discussion and, you know, the different points of view being put in and sifted. And what I want to say is that we come in like we're born, and from the very beginning, we're kind of being taught that our experience isn't exactly what it is. It's sort of like, well, a little bit more of this. And so I think part of the problem is, instead of taking like the 10 viewpoints and throwing them all in together and looking for what makes the most sense, we either go black or white. And it's not black or white. It's not all or nothing. Yeah, that's all. That's the best I can articulate it for now. It's way more.
Yeah.
Wait, who are you accusing of going black and white?
Well, first of all, accusing.
Yes, because you
That's a-
say we do this black and white business. Who are you saying does that?
well, you're included.
How so?
Most of us do it.
People who-
When you talk about a typical Trump supporter, we do it
Yeah.
all the time.
I will.
Anytime
Yes,
you use the
I will.
words right and wrong, you're doing black and white. It's either right or wrong. That's black and white.
Exactly.
People use the words right and wrong. If you say, I want to teach you right from wrong, that's black and white.
Yep.
That's why there's a triangle. There's three sides: right, wrong, and maybe.
And in the middle of that triangle,
Yeah, the excluded middle, inventing the excluded middle, which is the ethical best practices, which is not taught, because you got to compute it from, you know, on a case-by-case basis. And even though I can show you a dozen cases, the case you have at hand doesn't quite align with the cases that you've studied.
Can I do a quick survey?
Sure.
If we go around the room, each 6 of us, answer, is there a truth outside of us? And is there a method by which we can actually get closer to that truth? Just those 2 questions.
Yes.
Can I ask each of us to answer that?
I think so.
Okay. First question is there a truth outside of yourself? True. Second, is there a method by which I can get closer to that truth? I'm curious to see what people think here.
Yes to both questions. And the way to find it is by going inside yourself.
Anyone else?
I think it's a function of time. What's true today may not be true tomorrow. So the truth is a function of time, and we're always lagging behind reality. So you can chase after the truth, but you're never going to catch up to it. And there are
And
practices which
what is
are
the method? What is the method, Barry?
observation, observation and analysis.
Okay.
If you discover a little bit of truth, nail it down so it can't escape, and build
Okay.
on it.
Anybody else?
Yes, it's described
Josh is
in
gonna
most
go.
of the mystical religions or mystical understandings called gnosis. And it's pretty much the same method as the scientific method, which was created long before what science claims it was. We pay attention to how things interact with each other. We define their natures according to those observations, and we recognize the truth. Like we've defined the spectrum of evolutionary niches according to environments. These were noted long ago. We also can pay attention to energy interactions according to their natures. And again, this was also discovered thousands and thousands of years ago. Some cultures call it the Tao, some call it gods, some call the consciousness levels angels, demons, gods. They're just words pointing to functional natures within existence. But it requires paying attention to what's being said and recognizing that we don't always grab hold of the right concept when a word is said. Much of language today is taken according to abstract meaning or defined in words, but many languages in the past were created by people who had synesthesia, and so the words are actually images. The word God to me is the shape of a particle coming out of a water surface and then falling back into it. Or Turth is a ruffled surface. There's other words, but I can't think of them at the moment. Many of the characters in certain languages like Sanskrit, Gurmukhi, some Japanese ones are all synesthetically perceived characters. It's what the sound looks like in their mind. Kabbalah talks about lots of high different energy levels. The Sikoli text is full of talking about different natures of music interacting, different types of beings interacting, talks about cause and effect. Christianity's full of it, but people misunderstand what's being said.
Joel, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
You're talking about things that were way back in the ancient times, beliefs and superstitions and religions and philosophy, that the Tao and all these things that were way back a long time ago. And, you know, recent discoveries, I think this is the line you're on. Recent discoveries have shown us how wrong we were about a lot of the things. You know, the Earth's not flat. And
It was never a belief. That's a falsehood of the modern day.
well, the thing is, what I've learned over the years is that the further you go back in time and analyze the belief systems that were in use and the scientific knowledge and everything, the further you go back, the more likely you are to find errors. And the further you go back, the larger the errors appear to be. So this is an indication that our knowledge and awareness of what is truth is evolving. It's growing and becoming more clearer as time goes by. Over.
Can I bring it full circle?
Please.
I just want to expand on what Barry and Joel said and what Alex said, which is Barry started it off with truth is a function of time. And there's a parable that really illustrates that really well. It's the saying of the Sphinx: what stands on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night? So what's true? Is that true that there could be a creature that does all those things? But if you use a function of time as the morning being the first part of your life, and then the next part and the third part of your life, then that's the answer. I think we all know it. It's man. So it's true that there is a creature that stands on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night. But it's perception. Truth is perception. And if Alex's perception is one thing, Joel's perception is another thing, why are we not just listening to that perception? Because I think the truth is somewhere in between, where we listen to Joel's perception of how he feels about what he's talking about and not make a judgment whether he's right or wrong, or say that's only how people thought in a certain time, because that could be how people think 4,000 years from now, or it could be how Joel feels right now. And that's, to me, that's what the truth is. The truth is seeing someone's perception, easing into what that is. If you're healthy and you're walking on 2 legs, that's awesome. If you have a cane and you're older, that's your perception. That's your truth. You're a 3-legged person, and that's your truth. And with that, I'm complete. That's what I think the truth is.
Alex, did you want to go? I have my hand up.
I just mentioned that truth is often relative to the observer. Over.
So may I go?
Please.
For that truth that is relative to the observer, may we substitute the word truth there for experience or perception?
Yeah, or even theorem.
Because if you claim that that's truth without recognizing there's a truth that's outside of you, outside of your experience, that's repeatable by others, by instruments, with faculties way beyond your senses. That outside observable, repeatable truth is one that we can actually all together observe and potentially agree on. Whereas if it's just inside you, there's no way for anyone else to really verify that. So I think it's valid to claim that that's experience or perception, but do you really want to give it the word truth? And I would say no, because if you do, then this whole notion of truth is corrupted. It's weakened. And those who are intent on weakening the notion of truth have largely succeeded here in the United States. So that people are then allowed to believe any bullshit they really want to believe. And that will take down society. So there needs to be a stronger notion of truth, which exists outside of self, which is verifiable, repeatable, observable, recordable. And that, I think, will allow us to really get closer to nature and closer to the God, if you believe in one, who is speaking to us through all of these different senses. This country is on the border of disappearing from this planet because stupidity is taking over, because there is no respect for truth. Other countries may be not far behind. Some are doing well, but this country is in a bad state. So unless we resurrect this notion of truth, as long as we continue to bastardize it by confusing experience with truth, we're going down the wrong hole. We're going down the wrong path.
Yep.
And it's almost irretrievable.
Yep.
Over.
Unsustainable. Stacy.
I was just going to say, I can't, the only example that comes to mind is so many times where somebody's pointed and said, look over there, up at the sky. And I've looked right where their finger was pointing, and the two of us are seeing something totally different.
That's fine. That is perfectly fine, because now you've got something to talk about. But if somebody says, only I know it and you can't see it, there's no way to figure it out. There's no way to lean into that.
And that's what they usually have done. No, no, no.
You sow the seeds of doubt.
Josh?
I was just going to nitpick your word, Sam. When you said this country, I was going to say, in my mind, I heard El Salvador is going down the tubes. That's a shitty country right now. And they got a young president that's messing it all up and putting people in jail. But the fact that Alex is here from Australia and Joel's in England, this country could be any country.
No, I'm talking
And that's
about
my
this
truth.
country.
I don't know what this country is.
Yes, you do.
I don't. I'm being completely honest. You
No,
could
you're
have
not,
been
Josh.
talking about Taiwan earlier in the
No,
conversation,
you're not,
and that
Josh.
was out of context, so I wouldn't know. I'm being straight up. I don't know. I could assume you're talking about America, but that'd be an assumption. That wouldn't be truth. So
Yeah.
I don't know what this country is with that phrasing. So I'm nitpicking the word this.
You're nitpicking for a different reason, Josh.
No, I'm not. I'm really not. I'm being completely sincere. I'm not being agitating for agitating's sake. I'm saying the truth is important to be clear about what we're speaking of. And if you're
Was
saying
there any
this
doubt in
country,
anyone else here what country I was
good point.
speaking about?
Forget about what you were speaking. Oh, he's there. It's a good point. Regardless of why the point's being made now in this situation, it's a good point for all of us, for everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't be too nationalistic.
Sam said
I'm
this
just make
country.
I'm only making that comment because we're called the global challenges, and because Alex is here from Australia and Joel is here from England. That's the only reason I'm making that comment, is if we can think
Right.
globally and act
If I-
locally, that's awesome. And if you're talking about this meaning America, that's awesome. I'm not trying to be a jerk.
I was, and I think
Sorry, Sam, if it had been me saying that this country is going down the tubes, you all would have known I was talking
Yes.
about Australia.
yes,
But I think the point Josh is trying to make is that it's not only us that might be watching this recording, and it's a good example of how we should all watch ourselves when we say like it or this.
Well,
Yes.
when you talk about truth, the word I like to use as a near synonym of truth is theorem, because there are undiscovered theorems, which when they're discovered and established become a known truth, a demonstrable truth that can be relied on. But I've observed, for example, I follow a YouTube channel on puzzle solving that sort of revolves around Sudoku. And in the course of this channel, they've discovered theorems, true theorems about Sudoku that nobody knew, that you could use these theorems to help solve the puzzles. And it was an astonishing phenomenon of how I think 3 or 4 theorems have been discovered and established just in the domain of the properties of Sudoku puzzles. And so this notion of truth is a little bit kind of vague. I would rather say, what are the theorems that we know and have established? What are the theorems that remain to be discovered and revealed and is demonstrated and proven? What are the theorems which are merely conjectures, which we're pretty sure they're true because we haven't found any cases where they're not true, but we don't know how to prove them that they're always true in every possible case. So when you go to the discussion of theorems, you're now going to the domain of abstract mathematics. And you generally don't do a whole lot of abstract stuff at the lower levels of education, because it just takes up a lot of time and it's very arcane and it's very challenging to establish whether a theorem is always correct in all cases that you anticipate it to apply to. That's why theorem, I think, is more abstract, more sophisticated than simply the word true.
I think truth has dimension or weight that we can apply. Some things are more true than others.
Some theorems are better known than others, like the Pythagorean theorem, but it's only true on the plane.
Joel's hand is up.
That's half true.
When you understand what a lot of the Gnostic sides of the religions are talking about, they're pointing to dimensional things in exactly the same way science points to dimensional things. They're things that have shape and form. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it talks all the way through it about things that would just sound really obscure to anyone who didn't know what it was talking about. The only reason I understood what it was talking about was because I have synesthesia. Because I have synesthesia, I was sitting in meditation whilst listening to it, and I started noticing a lot of the flows and things they were describing were shapes and forms I was seeing in my vision at that moment. So the only reason I recognized the fact that the Book of the Dead was actually talking about effectively your different levels of sensory inputs was because I already have the perception to see those things. Not everybody has it. High dimensional synesthesias in less than 0.01% of the population as a common thing, as a sort of thing that's there all the time that you can't shut out. A lot of the Gnostic texts, a lot of Kabbalah, it's all talking about perceived interactions that can only be perceived through synesthesia or different types of synesthesia. You need to know what a god is. You need to know what an angel is. You need to know what a demon is. These aren't, what did Sam call them? I forget. But it gets dismissed by people who don't know what those things are talking about. because they don't understand them.
Yeah, abstractions.
But they're pointing to dimensional things.
Right.
My inner observer is not an angel or a demon. It's just a observation that I make.
But an angel is a type of consciousness, and a demon, the word demon, is away from mono, which means it considers itself not to be part of the mono nature.
I'm referring to the ancient text you're talking about, the Kabbalah and the Gnostic
Yes,
text.
so am I.
Yeah.
So there's very religious to start talking about angels and demons in the sense of superstition and fantasy that people
That was the
held
word.
years over.
So
It's
a
just-
scientific theory or model doesn't claim to be the truth, the ground truth. It claims to be a good approximation to it that's reliable up to a point. And so in science, we don't talk about scientific truth so much as theories and models, which are good approximations, the best ones we can come up with.
It was the people who didn't understand the concepts who came with superstition. What happens when you recognize the different levels of energy interaction? Or you've got consciousness up one end of the energy spectrum and the material form down the other end of the energy spectrum. Your brain effectively is wave patterns moving around. So that's your consciousness. And then you have your body. So that's two different levels of energy perception or energy interaction, which is again dimensional. What happens when you recognize the variance in that according to nature? One acts this way, another acts this way. One acts as part of the unified system and works together for that, and the other works against it.
I've got an empathy thing in me that makes me cry when I see other people hurt. And it's an emotional response to seeing suffering in somebody else. It's not an egocentric effect of my own suffering. It's something to do with other things. It's to do with my empathetic truth, my personal empathetic truth. The ability to empathize with others is what makes me human. Very human. Over. Stacey.
Alex, yeah, I just want to add to what you're saying, and I would say that it's a combination sometimes. It's a combination. And we have to learn to discern where it is our own emotions that are playing into it, if we want to stay healthy at least.
Well-being, emotional well-being. It's after 1 o'clock and Sam turned off his camera. What do we make of that?
We're still recording. We're in free time because the moderator has abandoned the meeting. No, he hasn't.
So what do we make of that? He didn't say anything, so I'm assuming he's coming back. So he could be letting a dog out.
Visiting the parallel universe. Who knows?
My hypothesis is that he would come back to say that he's leaving. That's what I'm working under, but yeah, I have to get going too, so.
And there was a lively discussion, as they say in the trade.
It was nice getting together.
Who likes the idea I suggested at the beginning that we name the session the Sunday session?
I wouldn't even make that decision until we find out, number one, if what Sam's going to go forward with, or if anybody else wants to propose something, because I think that they should, whoever is going to take the lead should definitely have a voice in whatever it's called.
Well, for example, you could call it the Sunday gathering, but the Greek word for gathering is Ecclesiastes, which is a word that's used in theology, but it literally means gathering. So you could say this is an ecclesiastical session if you spoke Greek, but Sam probably wouldn't want to call it that.
Would anybody else like to check out?
What is it I wouldn't want to call something?
We're talking about what to name the session, and I said you could call it the Sunday gathering, for example, but the Greek word for gathering is Ecclesiastes.
What's the
And
Greek word?
I suggested that you probably wouldn't care to call this an ecclesiastical gathering on Sunday.
What's the Greek word for session?
I don't know.
I have
Or
a
you could call it in Taiwanese. In Taiwanese, it would be the Gongwei Zhehui.
Which none of us could pronounce or spell.
Just together we are talking.
Yeah.
I have a proposal. I propose that whoever's interested, whether it's on, we started on a Google Doc, we come up with a list of things that worked and things that didn't work before we recreate something new for that time slot, and see if we can implement any guidelines to try to mitigate those things.
I concur with that. That was what I had called a retrospective at the beginning of the session. Those are typical questions you ask during a retrospective. What worked? What didn't work? What should we start doing new? What should we stop doing? Those are typical 4 questions in a retrospective.
So then I have one more suggestion. I'm sorry, Alex, if you don't mind. Why don't you send out a when to meet, and we schedule a pop-up call just for that purpose?
How about next Sunday at this time?
Yes,
Well,
I've got some things to contribute from the 12 traditions. I can pick out the religious ones that are heavily biased in favor of Christianity and use the others, because there are some others in there that aren't related to religion that are excellent because they're related to how groups cohere
Hey, Alex,
together.
I'm suggesting that you do this as part of Stacy's suggestion, not now, but during the week. Okay.
Yes.
So I'll send around what used to be called the behavior experiment spreadsheet, which has a number of proposed guidelines and practices. I suggest that if you have them, put them there. If they're new, put them there. And if you haven't already responded to them, there's probably a column with your name on it already there, and try and respond to them. There's about 90 plus different practices and guidelines that are already there that we've tried to experiment with over the last 5 years. So
And
we
maybe-
don't necessarily have to come up from scratch every single time.
And maybe a self-prediction of how likely you are to adhere to the practices or depart from them.
That's
'Cause
the
we all
point
tend
of
to-
each individual column, is whether you yourself subscribe to that practice or not.
That's not the same. Subscribing and adhering are not the same thing. I depart from things I am attempting to adhere to quite often. Well, not say quite often, but
That's just human.
too many times, let's say, put it that way.
That's just human.
Yeah, that's the point. And then what do you do when people depart from the practices they subscribe to?
Well,
That's
let's
the-
talk
that's-
about that also. Let's talk about
that's-
that also. Because
That's the
sometimes
bugaboo. That's the bugaboo.
that's a problem, sometimes that's not.
but again, I want to warn against that all or nothing thing. So somebody might interrupt to say, oh, you forgot to record. That mean they broke the rule to not interrupt? It was time sensitive.
You can put your hand up if you notice
Okay,
something's not.
I will
recording.
send around that spreadsheet. I just interrupted Alex, okay, because I'm gonna go do something else, okay? I'm gonna send around that spreadsheet. I'm gonna ask those 4 questions. If you choose to participate, that's great. If you choose not to participate, then that's an indication of your willingness to do so. And then we'll
Not
schedule that session.
necessarily.
Yes,
Not
it is. Yes, it
necessarily.
is. Yes,
Maybe you didn't get it. Maybe you never received it.
unlikely.
Unlikely, but that's not definite, which is the point I keep trying to make.
Anyway, I propose that we do this again with that framing of the conversation for next Sunday.
Josh?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I would like that next Sunday. That would be great. And I think we've argued enough about rules. Maybe we can just baseline it with there's no rules and it's all anarchy and chaos, and then try to do the best that we can. And when things get out of order, because it will, because it's chaos, then we implement some rules that help to keep things interesting and fun and good, and just kind of relax a little bit. Like we'll figure it out together as a group. That's
Or
my point, is I think
protocols
we've
instead
got
of
this.
rules. There's
I'm
always the
complete.
option
Go ahead,
of
Stacy.
there's also the option of upgrading from rules to protocols.
I was just gonna say that Josh just gave me the idea. I wonder how it would look if we put it as, I really appreciate it when, and then we, people don't, that would be interesting to see how everybody in the room feels about that. Okay. Enjoy the
Brian.
rest of your Sunday.
I agree with that idea.
Bye-bye.
Happy Easter for those who celebrate,
Ramadan, Passover,
whatever.
happy,
Yeah.
happy everything. Cheers.
Save the chat before it's too late.
Barry, by the way, I didn't ask you, Barry, do you celebrate Passover?
I used to, but I don't have anybody local who has a Seder. I used to get invited to Seders back when, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. At this point, there's nobody around here who has Seders that is in my circle.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm in the same this year. My dad had his Methodist church put on a Seder. It was interesting. I went to that. It was a real Seder. They had the bitters, everything, and it was nice.
yeah, I once attended a Jews for Jesus Seder sponsored by the guy who eventually became the chaplain of the Presbyterian Church in Newton, Mass. That was kind of unusual because they were sort of hybrid between Jewish tradition and Seder and Christian theology. So it's interesting.
It's cool. Well, I'm going to try to make a Passover next year because I miss it this year.
Yeah.
So cool.
Anyway.
Well, I hope you have a great weekend. I just,
Yeah,
I'm missing
Thanks.
Passover.
Yeah. Well, I'm invited to Easter dinner with some Christian friends tonight, so I'm going to be attending that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so. And we
Cool.
oftentimes talk about the differences between Jewish traditions and Christian traditions in that regard, because after all, Easter was a Passover Seder. The Last Supper was a Passover Seder.
Well, I don't know, just being in Boston, I don't know if for me, the Celtics are a religion and they're playing today against Brooklyn in the playoffs. So
yeah, and that's why Easter dinner is at 6:30, not in the afternoon today. Because
there you go. Yeah, we're
the
a big
kids wanted to
Celtics
watch the
fan.
playoffs, and so they postponed the dinner until after the playoffs are over.
All right. Well, I hope you're rooting for the Celtics, Barry.
Actually, I wasn't even aware that there was a playoff. So,
well, I'm making you aware. You're a Bostonian, so you're automatically a Celtics fan.
And actually, I have a neighbor who's a widow of Doug Moans, who I think played for the Celtics, or at least he played. At least I think he played. No, he played hockey. Never mind, he played hockey.
You played for the Bruins?
Probably. I don't really know.
All right. Well, we got a good chance this year, Barry. It's one of the few years since 2008 that we have a chance to go all the way.
All righty. Well, I'll find out tonight when I hear the outcome of the playoffs. So,
all right. Have a good one.
yeah,
Cheers.
Yeah. Let's see. Do I have an end? Okay. I do not have host privileges, so I'm just going to do leave meeting. And then I guess Sam will have to terminate it when he gets back. Have a good one, Sam.